Just hours ago, President Trump and President Vladimir Putin again had another phone call. This one was not announced ahead of time. In fact, I saw that Trump on his Truth Social posted 20 minutes before the call took place that he was going to do it. That was the first indication that I saw anywhere on in the internet or any other news services. So this seemed to come kind of out of nowhere. But it did happen. And so we've been waiting to see what the readouts were, what the different sides said. And so far, now we're starting to get some information. The kind of one of the leading headlines is that what Trump asked for, Russia didn't give, that Trump wanted an immediate, again, ceasefire or a quick resolution to the war. And Putin says no. That's kind of the headlines here. But when you start to read into it a little bit more, it wasn't kind of an adversarial situation at all. In fact, at least according to the Russian readout, it was pretty positive. It was cordial, it was professional, etc., and had some optimistic things in it. I think one of the things that we'll see, and we're going to discuss this in a minute, is that Russia still is looking long term. They're not just looking at the Russia-Ukraine war; they are looking beyond that, and they actually desire a good relationship with the United States, and that's good news. It's good news because anything that's going to get the threat of war off the table or the threat of this war expanding is something that we should grasp with both hands. And it appears that President Trump is leading that direction. That is quite in contrast to what virtually the rest of the Western world is doing, and what many even Trump supporters in the United States are advocating. They want more antagonistic views towards Russia. They don't want to get anything off the table. And if you've watched our earlier two shows today, which I recommend you go back and do, you see that it really looks like that many in the West actually desire conflict with the Russia. As crazy as that sounds, there is evidence to support it. It does appear, however, that President Trump is not in that group. And that is really good news to anyone who doesn't want war, me being chief among them. So let's take a look at what was said here. First of all, I'm going to go to the U.S. media, what we're reporting in the Wall Street Journal. This is one of the first ones I saw here. And that's where you see Trump holds first call with Putin after the pause in the Ukraine weapon shipment. And that's why the timing of this is very interesting, because it was just, I guess, basically 36 hours ago that the U.S. announced that we are withholding several categories of weapons, especially 155 millimeter artillery shells and interceptor missiles. Those were really the two key ones that are so influential and critical to anything in the Russia-Ukraine war. So we announced that. And then now today on this phone call, according to the Wall Street Journal, Trump urged Putin to quickly end the war in Ukraine, but the Russian president refused, according to a Kremlin briefing on the call. The White House has yet to release its own summary. Gary, if you could keep an eye, if that happens at any time while we're on the air, we'll certainly jump in and break that to you. But so far, as of this airtime, it has not. Putin told Trump during the call that Russia won't back down from its goals in Ukraine, according to Yuri Yushakov, close advisor to the Russian president, despite the U.S. leader's call for a speedy end to the conflict. Our president said that Russia will achieve its goals, that is, the elimination of the well-known root causes that led to the current state of affairs, Yushakov said. And then he said Russia will not back down from these goals. And that can't surprise anyone who's been paying attention, because the United States has been saying forever that the Russian side has been saying forever that they have non-negotiable goals and objectives for this fight, and that they're going to continue to go down that path. Every time the issue has come up, every time negotiations or discussions, Russia is very, very consistent that the root causes is what they have to have addressed. And if you don't recall that, or if you can't remember right off the top of your head, let me show you. Here's what Vladimir Putin said, I believe a month or so ago, on what those root causes are.
We agree with the propositions to stop hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that such ceasefire should be such that would lead to a permanent peace and remove the original causes of the crisis.
And of course, those are that no NATO in Russia, that there has to be a demilitarization, there has to be a denazification. All this is, of course, according to the Russian interpretation. These, as Gary's showing you here, this is the Russian 12-point peace proposal to end the Ukraine war, which they proposed at Istanbul Let's see, I guess that was about a month or so ago when the Russia and Ukraine for the first time got together since 2022. And you see a lot of those permanent Ukrainian neutrality, termination of international agreements that conflict with these neutrality provisions, i.e., no NATO, legal guarantees that Ukraine will remain a non-nuclear state, full protection of rights, freedoms, and official language for the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, and on down the list. All these 12 points there were, as we said at the time, were basically claims that this is what you're going to have to do. This is something close to terms of surrender. And we talked about how difficult that was and how bitter of a pill that would be for anybody in the West, or certainly in Kiev, to swallow. But that's less bitter than the fight continued to go on. That's what we said then. Now then, all these things that have happened since, where the West is saying, all right, now we're going to increase the pain on Russia. We want to have new sanctions. Even though the first 18 rounds didn't work, we're going to try a 19th and see if that can bring enough pressure. We showed you one of the comments from earlier today from Keir Starmer yesterday, where he's still saying we have to force Putin to come to the table where he can negotiate on terms that we want, that the Ukraine side wants, and then there'll be a, quote, just and lasting peace. Obviously talking completely past each other as Russia continues to say, we ain't doing that. We're just not going down that path. And you have Western Europe still going down that path. But now let's take a look at what the Russian side had to say, because their readout of this was actually pretty substantial. They didn't hold back any here. This is from RIA Novosti, and by the way, this is actually a Russian language news site here, but it's being translated by Google Translate. That's how we're able to read it here. But let's just go over some of the comments here, because this was more than just the Russia-Ukraine war. They're also talking about issues that go beyond the war and in the Middle East. And let's see here. So on the Ukraine conflict, according to the Russian side, the interlocutors exchanged views on the situation at the Ukraine. Putin confirmed the readiness of the Russian side to continue negotiations. More on that in a minute. He informed his American counterpart about the implementation of the Istanbul agreements. I think that's probably a reference either to the original one in 2022 or those 12 points that Gary just showed you a second ago. Specifically, the content and possible of a third round of negotiations in Istanbul was not discussed, but Russia's ready for it. So apparently they found that noteworthy that Trump didn't mention anything about that, but that Russia says, hey, we're still willing to do so. Trump again raised the question of an early cessation of hostilities. I think this is going back to where Trump has been saying since March that he wants an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. That's what he's been asking for. But that's why, in fact, that was the context of that soundbite by Putin we just showed you, where he says, yeah, I mean, we're conceptually willing to talk about it, but only if the root causes are addressed, and a whole bunch of other conditions that he put on top of it there. None of those have changed. And according to Yuri Yushikov, he's just quoted here, he said, our president also said that Russia will achieve its goals, that is, the elimination of all the root causes that led to the current state of affairs, and Russia will not retreat from these goals. That's something repeated in the Wall Street Journal. So you see the Russians are saying the exact same thing here. That is really important, because Russia has the capacity, they have the leverage, they have the manpower, they have everything they need to actually keep that true. That they don't have any reason to retreat from the goals. They don't have any, there's no leverage or compulsion on the Western or Ukraine side that can force Russia, despite what Keir Starmer may think, into retreating from those goals, into accept something less than what they want. You may also have seen Dr. Gilbert Doctorow earlier today said that's one of the problems with the West, that we think that we can compel Russia, but Russia is not going to be compelled to do so. They are very firm in what they're going to do. Going quickly to the Middle East, the president's talked about the situation around them in Iran, especially, and the Middle East as a whole. Putin stressed the importance of resolving all controversial issues exclusively by political and diplomatic means, i.e., let's stop the war there. Let's don't escalate that any further. We've got a ceasefire. Let's keep that going, and everything else that still has to be discussed, and, well, that's basically everything. Let's figure it out by diplomatic means. We'll see how successful that turns out to be. As we've talked about, Israel is not very much wanting to negotiate on anything other than waiting until they're ready for more military means. But still, I'm all for that. And if they want to go down that path, that would be wonderful. Parties agreed to continue contacts on this issue between foreign ministers, defense ministers, and the presidential aide. So the U.S. and Russia will continue to talk about issues in the Middle East. And again, that is a very positive sign. Anything that you can get to where you're talking state to state, which of course was on pause during the majority of the Biden administration, that should continue on, because that is in America's interest. If you're not talking to an adversary, then you don't have any chance to get anything resolved. You don't even have the possibility of having anything negotiated in your favor. Russia has the leverage, so they can compel a lot of things, but because Russia does have the incentive to have better negotiations beyond this war, there is some leverage to where we can get some things done. If you're not talking, however, then you forfeit that. So at this point, President Trump deserves credit because he is continuing that dialogue. And in fact, on that point, the Russians say on the prospects for cooperation, Putin and Trump confirmed their interest in joint economic projects, in particular energy and space. So again, both presidents are continuing to look beyond this conflict. I think both have an interest in getting it off the table so that they can go on to the business of living and in a cooperative situation where the risk of war, especially nuclear war, continues to recede. We're too close to that right now, and God willing that will continue on, and Trump will continue to press issues and ignore what the Europeans and especially Mark Rutte is saying about basically wanting to shove things in Russia's face and continue to go towards negotiation or confrontation. Vladimir Putin also handed over to his American counterpart an interesting thing here, a proposal for exchange of films, which was discussed in the forum. And Yushakov adds this quote here. Vladimir Putin mentioned that just before the conversation with Donald Trump, he talked with representatives of the Russian business community. In particular, during this meeting, the idea was expressed about the exchange of film products between the two countries, which promote traditional values that are close to us and the Trump administration. Trump immediately reacted, said that he was impressed by this idea. So that's obviously something that's good as well. I'm not sure what they're talking about with films, but I guess they're talking about making films. But again, anything that you can do that's going to move things in a direction where people can talk and they can have discussions and they can agree on anything, even if it's on movies, for crying out loud. That's a good thing, because that really takes off this whole black and white issue of good or evil, and you're either all evil or you're all good, which is nonsense, because that really doesn't even exist in the world. But anything you can get to puts a human face on things, that helps both sides. So that actually is a good thing as well. And then also showing that Putin is not being confrontational and is not, saying it's my way or the highway situation. He congratulated Trump. They spoke on the successful package in Congress of a bill on reforming tax. It's a little bit premature, I believe. Apparently there was some procedural hurdles that were cleared. I checked just before we came on the air here, and that still hasn't passed, but apparently it's looking good for the President Trump, but he got congratulations anyway. Putin also wished the American leader success and congratulated him on Independence Day, which is celebrated on July 4th.
Danny, the bill just did pass just a few minutes ago.
It did pass?
Yeah, it did. It's passed.
Okay, well, there you go. I guess what I had was dated, so I guess those congratulations are fully in order now. So I guess that's another good thing that for Putin, because you see that Putin knows what's important to Trump, and he's getting on board with him, trying to say, hey, again, he's trying to create some goodwill. So that's another positive thing. The leaders also talked for almost an hour. They did not discuss possible personal meeting, but an agreement on it will be reached if necessary. So we're not to that point yet. So that's just reality, because if you see anything about Trump and Putin having a meeting scheduled, a personal meeting, then that tells you that things are like in the 11th hour of being resolved. And then they're probably close to having an actual end of war discussion and agreement of some sort. So I'm certainly eager to see that, but we're not there yet. But at least they're still talking about it. And then Yushakov ended by saying, in general, I would like to note that the conversation between the presidents, as always between these leaders, was on the same wavelength, was frank, businesslike, and specific. And listen, that's all in all, that's a positive thing. That's good, because you see that the two leaders, unlike almost anybody else in the West, although Macron did talk to Putin, that was an interesting discussion there. Not sure where that's going. many things about Macron. That's the first time he's talked to Putin since I think the early days of the war. And the problem is that the France doesn't have a lot of leverage or a lot to bring to the table. So I think that Putin, again, is showing that he's willing to talk to anybody and he's willing to engage in negotiations. But I don't expect a lot to come out of that because France can't pull anybody else in any directions. They can only deal with France. But whereas Trump, wherever he goes is where the alliance is going to go as well. And despite what Starmer and Macron and Merz and all these other guys, no matter what they all say together, Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, etc., they can all say whatever they want. But if Trump doesn't get behind it, it's not going to happen. So if the president of the United States decides that we're going to have some sort of an accommodation with Russia, then that's what's going to happen. And it's very unlikely, though I guess you can't completely take it off the table, that Europe would basically break from the United States, break from Trump and say, no, we're going to continue going on down this path. It's possible, but I think it's very unlikely because they wouldn't have the economic support, the psychological support, or the physical support. So I doubt that they would go that path on their own, but never say never. One of the interesting things also that was on the, I think it was on the Wall Street Journal readout, is it said that President Trump is going to talk to Zelensky tomorrow. So again, I'm sure that he's not very happy about that because first of all, President Trump announced that he's getting rid of the support that we've been giving him. And then now here again, he talks to Vladimir Putin first, and then is going to talk to him second. So doesn't look like he's got a lot of leverage, Zelensky does, in terms of whatever happens between Russia and the United States, which frankly is how it should be. And I'm sure, though, that Zelensky, being the master manipulator that he is, and we got to give him his props. I mean, it's just an acknowledgement of reality. He is very, very good at manipulating people and very, very good at showmanship, etc. So if Trump is that in the United States, Zelensky certainly is that inside of Ukraine, and he has not shied in using it on Trump or in anybody else in the West to a lot of success. We'll see what happens after that too. But let's. I want to focus here in the last few minutes we have on setting expectations. So Putin is talking to Trump. He's trying to do it in a collegial way. He's trying to maintain good relations because he wants to have. He understands that the world is going to continue to exist after this war is over, and he's going to have relations with the United States one way or the other, and he wants it to be at least useful. And non-kinetic, fighting back and forth. He doesn't want that to be on the possibility, so he's working toward that end. But that doesn't mean that Putin is going to get into a situation to where he's going to start giving things away. They have been incredibly significant, incredibly consistent from the beginning of where their red lines are, where they're no kidding, we will not negotiate beyond here. And that you can really go all the way back to Istanbul in 2022. But this right here is kind of what has formed the foundation of the current situation of June 14th of 2024.
The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification.
You see, there was virtually no difference between that and what Russia's saying right now, and what Yuri Yushikov was reiterating from the phone call that happened just a couple of hours ago. So Russia is still in that same spot, and they have the military capacity to drive that home. Last month, Putin said something else that is very, very important to understand here, that don't read too much into his willingness to have discussions and negotiations and talk in diplomatic ways. That's what he wants, but he also has another side to that coin.
Благодаря усилиям западных союзников Украины, они выбросили эти договоренности в помойку, как я говорил, и решили воевать с нами до последнего украинца и до полной стратегической победы. Этого не получается, и поэтому мы вместо мирных договоренностей на этот счет вынуждены с помощью вооруженных сил добиваться решения этой задачи, а именно демилитаризации. Мы не допустим, чтобы на Украине были вооруженные силы, которые угрожают в перспективе Российской Федерации и ее народу. Вот эти удары и видели ваши журналисты. И, безусловно, если мы не договоримся мирным путем, мы будем добиваться поставленных целей военных.
So there's no difference. There's no change there. They will get it either the peaceful way, i.e. negotiated settlement where the sides agree to it and then it's implemented on the ground, or there's going to be the military way where they're going to seize by force of arms everything that they want. And it bears repeating here. I've mentioned this. I've been talking about this since Trump came into office. The Western side, the Ukraine side, the United States, all that writ large has an opportunity to say, let's have an ugly negotiated settlement on terms that we don't like, but are at least tolerable today, right now. That includes all of the administrative borders of those 4 oblasts. And that means that Ukraine would have to withdraw some areas it has. Now, that was the June 14 terms. Since that time, Ukraine attacked into Russia and spent about 8 months there, 7 or 8 months inside the Kursk area. They were driven back, and in the process of being driven back, now Russia has gone into the Sumy Oblast. And there's, by many reports, quite a large contingent of troops that Russia has up in the north that they could continue that onslaught to go down even into the Sumy city if necessary. There's still Russian troops in the Kharkiv area. There's now Russian troops in the Dnipro province, in addition to Donetsk and Luhansk and the fourth one down there. Can't recall right offhand. All of these provinces right now are at play. There are Russian soldiers there. No one has been talked about it on the Russian side about withdrawing from any of those. So the terms were those 4. Now, all of a sudden, there's 3 additional oblasts in play. And what Russia will do with those is anybody's guess. But this is what I've been warning about from the beginning of this war, is the longer you delay having what you would consider an ugly negotiated deal, and it would be, I'll say, intolerable, but it better be tolerated, the negotiated deal that they're offering, because you saw that look in Putin's face, and don't misread that. That's not just theater. That is the look of conviction. He will either get what he wants on the negotiating table, or he will take it on the battlefield. That's just the truth of it. And they have the resources to do it. They definitely have the political will. They have the support of their population to acceptable degrees. They have the industrial capacity. I mean, even if it takes another year or 2, you've seen, we've had many of the Russian folks on from the Russian side say unequivocally, yeah, we would like it to be over sooner. But if it continues on for a year or 2, we'll keep doing that, because they view this as an existential issue. They do not want to, they don't trust us, so they don't really believe a lot about, another Minsk agreement. But they'll only trust what they can protect by themselves. And that's why they say that they'll accept a negotiated settlement on their terms, because their terms are going to ensure that they have physical control of their western flank, and that there is a demilitarization that is not big enough that they can't change their mind later, or they can't get an alliance with any of the Western European leaders and come back and again threaten the Russian, either the Russian Federation itself or the Russian-speaking people that will still be living at various places inside the Ukraine state. So that's what's on the table here. And what does that mean for President Trump? It means if he thinks he's going to get a victory out of this and come out looking good, he might want to reconsider, because he's already made a lot of promises that he can't back up, like, I'm going to have this resolved in a day. I'm going to have it resolved before I get into office. I'm going to have it resolved in 100 days. I'm days away from walking, and then none of those things ever happened. So already he's kind of wearing thin to his own population, to his own supporters, that you keep making all these claims and yet none of them keep coming to pass. Well, now then he has said, probably not because of any desire to do so, that we're going to cut off a lot of the key weapons systems and ammunition categories to Ukraine, not because that's part of any coherent strategy, but just because we don't have it. We don't have enough. Our industrial capacity is not enough to replace all that's continuing to have been sent to Ukraine, some into the Middle East, to Israel, et cetera, especially some of these interceptor missiles. That's like gold right now. We just don't have them. That's the reason we shut down the Red Sea operation. We just didn't have it to continuation on something that couldn't succeed. And this can't succeed either. And Russia has shown that they're despite the at least still the limited capacity for interceptors in Ukraine, Russia is increasing the frequency and the volume of its air attacks. So even you'll never catch up. You'll always be just a little bit further behind. And it's why continue to waste your ammunition? Why continue to take these precious pieces of gold and continue to throw them into an empty pit that won't change the outcome anyway? You might lose slower, but you're still going to lose. And that's what Trump is going to have to come to grips with here pretty quick, that he may come to the point to where he's like, all right, there's no more pretending here. We're not going to go backwards. We're not going to like suddenly give a bunch of stuff like General Jack Keane's always trying to press Trump into doing. We just don't have it. And nor even if we did have it, we shouldn't use it because Ukraine doesn't have the manpower to use it. We saw Julian Rupka earlier this week talking very bluntly, there aren't enough Ukrainian men now, and that density continues to erode and to get less as the days go by. So everything that a rational person can think, all the physical evidence, forget the spin that you get from a lot of these European leaders, but the actual realities on the ground, the actual realities in our inventories and the numbers of assets that are there and the dwindling number of those assets as well. And you see the increasing number of the same categories of assets on the Russian side. Any rational thinking person would recognize that despite however much you may want something to happen, however hard Zelensky may press, it doesn't change these realities. It's a zero-sum issue on the manpower in Ukraine. Every day you lose these soldiers, hundreds or thousands in some cases, they're irreplaceable. You just continue to whittle away at the resource-based area. You can't those, folks. You can't rebuild that in any kind of a short time period. So it's time now to really recognize this. And I hope we're getting to the end state to where that Trump does almost the only thing he can do to single-handedly bring this thing to a conclusion. That is say, we're not just stopping with the, those categories of weapons. We're ending all our support here. And it's time to take all of our guys home. We're ending our intelligence support. We're ending our training, et cetera, because we're no longer going to be putting these assets and these resources into a known failure. Because in my view, and this is something the president can make with ease, it is an immoral position to take that we're going to keep doing those things when we know all it's going to do is mean more Ukrainian deaths. It's time to say, look, we're going to stop all of that. And I think behind the scenes, he can also put a lot of pressure on key European allies to get them to do the same thing. I don't think he should just do it in a vacuum. I think he should do it with a coordinated way to tell all these guys in Europe, hey, I get it. You tried. We did our best. It didn't work. Now it's time to acknowledge reality, get this thing off the table, and let's get back to peace so that we can all improve our economies and we don't have to, self-inflicted wounds with all of this, having to have higher priced gas everywhere else, et cetera. Let's get all that stuff turned back on and get back to the process of just living in some kind of peace and harmony. Maybe that's a strong term. Now it is. There's a lot of bad blood and a lot of hatred that's gone on because of so many things here in the parties, but at least stability. We can at least get into a stable place of where it's the threat of war is going to be off the table or greatly diminished. At least in time, we can get it completely off the table. And then we can get back to at least a possibility of harmonious relations in the future if people are willing to have any kind of sanity and rational thought and common sense. We'll see how that plays out. But that's the situation that we know so far from what's been read out. Again, if we got any kind of a readout from the U.S., if there's any difference between those, we'll certainly bring that to you tomorrow. But all in all, I consider this a positive thing because the Russian side remains cordial. They remain professional. They keep the doors of communication open, and so is the Trump administration. They're doing the same thing, and both leaders deserve credit, which we heartily give, because anything that moves the situation of war in any direction that looks like towards peace or this end of war is a positive thing, which is to be encouraged. Thank you very much, folks, on this special edition, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.